Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we're going to talk about business, technology, and startups here with our guest. Thank you so much, Suresh, here for joining us today. Perhaps maybe we can start by you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into law and a bit about your practice.
Thank you very much. So my name is Suresh, and I'm a lawyer with business and technology lawyer with Suresh Law. My background is in business and technology. In terms of studies, I studied engineering, MBA, and law. In terms of my practices, I've done 3 of my own technology startups across my career. And recently, I held different business executive positions at technology companies. So all these unique experiences gave me the background to be able to provide better legal service for businesses and understand their pain, understand their needs. So that's what led me to go to law school and practice in this niche area of primarily business and technology. So I work with a lot of startups through incubators, and so I continue to do that in a legal capacity, but also my passion in technology and business allows me to better serve them.
Well, that's quite the interesting combination, engineering, business, and law. So did you start with like an engineering degree first, and then you went into business and then law school, or how did it all come about?
Yep. So I did electrical engineering at the University of Waterloo. Then I also have a BA in liberal studies from the University of Waterloo. During those times, I used to, back in high school, I was introduced to computers. So just to back things up a little bit. And there itself, I started a web design company, and I worked for leading companies such as IBM, and went across to Dominica to work for Cuban Wireless. So eventually, I went to University of Waterloo to do engineering. And during my co-op terms, I worked for Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA, BlackBerry, and so on. But all throughout this time, I had an entrepreneurial mindset. So I did another startup to refurbish and export computers to developing countries. So this passion for technology and entrepreneurial spirit just went hand in hand with doing startups and working with other startups. So I naturally wanted to go into an MBA to get more business skills. So that's what led me to do an MBA at Laurier. And then while I'm doing that, I'm working with Communitech and a lot of technology startups in Waterloo region. And I realized the impact law has plays a role in startups. So I wanted to eventually, and then also, everybody has a personal journey. So my personal journey kind of led me towards law school, and I wanted to complete the legal education and continue to work with technology startup primarily, but provide more legal services. So that's kind of the journey that I took in a nutshell on the professional side, but it's been a lot of education, a lot of work experience, a lot of startup experience, and now I just want to find a way to put all this together and, provide valuable legal services to businesses.
Well, that's excellent. I mean, there's so much that you could provide given that background, right? From you understand sort of the technology in terms of the engineering, as well as obviously the business that they're looking at growing and starting, and then making sure they cross their T's and dot their I's there with the legal stuff. So it's a great combination. Perhaps maybe you can share a little bit more. I know we just talked at the beginning about your practice. What are the different kinds of things that people can come to you and come to Suresh Law if they're looking for your services?
Yeah. So I primarily practice in the areas of business law and technology law and other supplementary areas of law. So most of the clients who are coming to me are either trying to start a business, or they already have an existing business and they want to grow it further and they need some sort of legal assistance. So we provide service for the entire spectrum. So everything from when they're trying to start an idea and they have an idea and they look at what legal framework needs to be in place before they even get started. So, founders agreements, so different agreements. And if they're trying to incorporate, I help them to evaluate the different options they have and what kind of incorporation they should do at what point in time. And if they're trying to work in a team in terms of founders, what kind of arrangements need to be made between them and agreements. So all that kind of counseling I provide in terms from the legal angle. Then once they're ready to get started, we incorporate the company and we do any agreements that may be needed in terms of shareholder agreements and so on. And then once they're ready to grow and have a need to hire employees, then any employment contracts or any technology licensing contract that may be needed. So these are the different type of things. And then when the startup is trying to raise capital and they're trying to bring in investors, issuing shares, transferring shares, all that sort of things is also something that lawyers can advise them and help them with. And these are the kind of services that I provide. And a lot of businesses obviously would need a web presence and online presence. So if they have any terms and conditions, privacy policies, and all these kind of things are also things that we help with. So, it's a broad area in terms of business and technology. And for larger companies that have already grown, then they're looking at how can they grow further, having policies in place, having legal documents in place, licensing agreements. So it's a whole spectrum. Then in terms of supplementary areas, I do practice a little bit of real estate law as well. So if our existing clients need any real estate needs, then we assist with that. But the bulk of the work seems to be in the business and technology law.
And certainly there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different things that someone may come to you at the beginning, and then they may be wanting to continue to grow, and they may have, again, an employee. So there's consistent opportunities there to keep working with them on a long-term basis, rather than just coming in to draft the shareholders agreement or the partnership agreement or whatever they're needing, right?
Exactly, because once they do even incorporation or anything, they keep coming back for any legal needs. I'm almost their corporate lawyer for any legal needs that they have. So they keep coming back every time they need advice on something, or they're trying to get into a contract with anyone, or they have an issue, they come to me. And in some cases, I'm not able to assist them if they have a complex litigation, for example, or if they have some other personal matters such as family law or criminal law. In those instances, I refer them to other lawyers who they can work with in areas that I don't practice or I don't have the core competencies for. So, I'm almost like a trusted counsel that my clients come to as a first point when they need something legally. And then if I'm able to assist them, I help them. Otherwise, I point them in the right direction. So it's been a few months only in the making, but it's been very rewarding in terms of the number of clients who have been trusting me for their legal needs.
Now, Suresh, let's say someone comes to you now, they have this great idea. They're a startup, they have maybe some technology, maybe it's a legal technology, maybe it's something completely like some app, and they're saying, okay, Suresh, here's what I have. I really want to launch this. What do I need to do? Let's kind of walk through a hypothetical startup company, and what are some of the things that first that they got to get into, and what are some of the common mistakes that startups make that end up kind of killing their projects right from the beginning? And what are some kind of tips that you can offer for, I have, a lot of creative students have all these great ideas and they want to kind of move it off the ground. What are some of the things that they should be looking at doing?
Yeah. So from a business startup point of view, once you have the idea, the ideation stage, they would need to spend the time to really assess the idea, to do the market research, to understand is there a need for this? Is there customer base for this? Can I build this into a viable product? So they need to do that market research first, and then they would come to me to discuss on how to get started. So in that, first aspect is how do they want to structure their company? So do they want to incorporate? If they're going to incorporate, is it going to be a provincial or a federal incorporation? Now, is it going to be one person who's going to be doing the entire thing, or is there going to be co-founders? If that's the case, who will be the directors, officers, shareholders? All of that arrangement needs to be carefully thought out at the beginning stage, because oftentimes people just go with the flow to get started on the idea without having things in writing, or without having the entity created. And then once they get some traction, they run into some brick wall in terms of, okay, we didn't have things in writing. Maybe even a few years later, some people come back to me, they're like, we didn't have anything in writing. We're at this stage and we're having problems between partners, or we're not sure how to structure the company at this stage. We need to raise capital and we didn't incorporate properly, or we incorporated the company. Another thing that a lot of people do is they will do an incorporation online on themselves, but then they wouldn't do the entire organizing of the documents. They wouldn't do annual filings. They think that the tax filing is the only thing they need to do. But to keep the incorporation active, you need to do annual filings to maintain the company. So these are things that the lawyer, a corporate lawyer can assist them with, organizing the documents, but also ensuring that every year you're doing your annual shareholders meeting, you're updating your corporate records and filing them. So when it comes time to raising funds or bringing investors later on, you have everything in place already, rather than having to go back and organize things when it's needed in the last minute. So, this is essentially the beginning stage. Then, some people actually go the opposite route. They try to think about all the legal needs that they will have and try to do it at the beginning. So that's also, you need to balance, because sometimes you may be at the start line and you may be thinking, I need to have everything in order, like patents, trademark, and have all the agreements in place. But then you may not have the resources or the time to do everything. So you have to prioritize which you need to do first and which can wait for later, and which makes sense for you given what product or services you're trying to provide, because not everything may need to be done at the same time, and you may not have the time or the resources to do that. So kind of planning that out at the early stage will help you put together a roadmap, because for your startup, you'll have a roadmap of where you're trying to head in the short term and long term. So the legal should be part of that strategy, so that you don't need to do everything at once, right? So oftentimes I help the clients discuss and tell them that, you may not need to do certain things like patents right away until you build out the product. Same thing for trademarks, or for agreements, employment contracts can wait until you're ready to hire, that sort of thing, right? So it depends on the individual circumstances, and I'm always happy to discuss with the clients what their needs are.
All right, so maybe let's take a step back here for some of my students who may not know some of those phrases. They're like a patent, trademark, industrial design, copyright, right? I mean, they're all part of intellectual property. Well, I'm thinking back to my IP classes there in law school about how they're distinct. So maybe you can give us a quick overview of why there's all these different elements and why they're important for, especially a tech startup, to make sure that they've got everything covered.
Yep. So copyright. There's trademark, then there's patents. Now the three common ones primarily, right? So patent is when you normally, in technology, if they're coming with something, a new innovative process or an innovation, and that's unique to them, and they want to protect it from other people copying or without permission. There's a lot of money and time and effort that's involved in showing that your product or idea is unique by registering it, and it takes a while. And now with COVID, all this process takes even longer to file and go through the process to secure that you own the rights to the patent, to the idea. Then trademark is, whether it's a logo or a name or something that's unique to your business that you're trying to, or phrase or a sound that you're trying to register for your company to show that it's unique, but it has to be something that's in place for commercial purposes. And these different jurisdictions, people often think that when there's a trademark that they're using, they try to register it before they start using it. So that's something you have to really think about, because often there needs to be a commercial purpose that you're using it for already. So and the different jurisdictions apply. So if you register a trademark in Canada, it's in Canada that it's protected. And depending on where you're operating the business, you may need to look into different jurisdictions. And the same thing applies for patents as well. Copyright, oftentimes, whether it's a piece of code or a poem or something that you write or content on your website, that you show that that's your original work that you created. And you're automatically protected for in a lot of cases, but there are steps that you can take to register that to show that you own the copyright as well. So even in the case of trademarks, when even if you haven't registered a trademark and you're starting to use a trademark for your commercial purpose, you are getting certain level of protection already. And people can talk to me individually and I can explain all this. But by registering it, you're just putting it out there more in a searchable manner that you have registered the trademark.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think you just mentioned there's in one of the examples about code, and we have now a lot of this open source codes, right? And how does that kind of work? Because maybe you have this great code and I took it and I fixed something and I changed it and then somebody else did it. Like, what happens to the ownership, or does that just kind of, nobody owns it, you can do whatever you want with it? And if you try to copyright something like that, or you would be out of luck.
Yeah, so those are details that you need to look at. What are the agreements that you're getting into to see what code you're taking and what you're modifying, and any modification, is it original enough? Is it unique enough? Do you own that to be able to register that to make it yours? But if it's, sometimes there's agreements for open source projects that even if you make modifications that you can, it becomes harder sometimes to register that. So it depends on the individual cases, so you'd have to look at that. But basically, the threshold is you need to show that it's unique and you have something that's innovative, that you have made improvements, or you have created an innovative process, or something new.
And I guess that underscores the reason why you would want to talk to technology and business lawyers right from the get-go. Otherwise, your multi-million-dollar idea has gone out the window if you don't actually own the full essence of that idea, right?
And related to that, the concept of who owns the intellectual property. For example, and for startups, they may be hiring developers all over the world to work on their project, and it's very important for them to understand and have agreements in place in terms of who owns the piece of code that's being written, because you want to make sure that the startup or the company owns that project and that the developers transfer any ownership of that. Otherwise, you can get into problems down the line. So those are also important areas to consider right from the get-go in terms of ownership of the IPs. And yeah.
I see a question here, and we were talking about COVID. Obviously, COVID-19 has tremendous impact, not on just your business, but probably all of your clients. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how that has been such a game changer in the legal tech field. And we can go down a more detailed discussion certainly afterwards about what this means. But let's just start with generally, how has COVID played a role in what you're doing and what some of your clients are coming to you with? Are you finding more clients now have these great technological startups because they're sitting at home and they're like, okay, let me think of something different to do? Or are you finding things slowing down because people are a little bit more concerned of being very risky, given that there's not much available in case things go belly up?
So in my case, in some ways I've been fortunate enough that I started my law practice. That Suresh was born in the middle of COVID, so I was able to already assess what's happening around us and build my practice around that, right? But from the practice point of view and what's happening in the legal industry and what the customer behavior is and the client and the expectations, all that has shifted as well in my experience. So for example, in terms of customer expectation and also what they used to, normally they like to go to a lawyer in person and meet to discuss the ideas. Well, now with COVID, that's not happening. But still, I have clients who call me almost on a daily basis and ask, where is your office? Can I come meet you? I say, no, it's COVID times. We're going to meet over Zoom and we're going to discuss the idea. So it's still taking people some time to shift their mindset that it's not necessary to meet in person. They can discuss over the phone, they can meet over Zoom, and things can still get done in the same way or in a more efficient way, if anything. And so that's happening. And then in terms of ideas, I think given that people are more stuck at home or working from home, there's a lot of ideas that's flowing through people's head. And just like there's a lot of activity in the stock market, crypto market, and real estate market, the same thing is happening in the startup market. There's a boom of startups, right? So this is good for my business because people are being more creative. They're thinking of ideas, this cool project that I always wanted to do. Well, I got some more time right now since I'm sitting at home and focused with less time to socialize. So people are trying out different startups that they always wanted to do or getting new ideas. So all of a sudden there's a boom of technology startups, and that's really helping my practice. In terms of the legal industry, so I think the delivery, you can already see, for example, when we do wills, So I also do wills and I do real estate for my clients because they have to take care of their personal side as well, right? Not just the business. Especially when you own a business, you have to make sure you have a will, you are taking care of every aspect on your personal side for the entrepreneur as well, right? So on the will side, for example, you can do remote commissioning now. You don't need to have the ink on the paper. So all that the law society has changed the rules to allow us to do remote commissioning, but there's different rules that you need to follow to make the guidelines you need to follow to make sure that it's executed properly, right? So you can see that the pandemic has already caused the legal industry to change and adapt in order to make it more efficient for the lawyers, but also for the clients and to make it safer for them as well, right? And I feel that this is going to continue this way, where we're going to look for ways that to make things more efficient and embrace technology more and adopt technology more into the legal practice. And as a result of that, there will be a lot more legal tech startups as well. So, I'm connected with a lot of legal tech players who are trying to build technology solutions for the legal industry. And that's something that I'm very passionate about as well. And I think we're going to see more and more of that to see how, for example, you can do the same commissioning, how a commissioning can be done while you're instead of having DocuSign and Zoom call, there's a solution now where it's all integrated, right? So things like that. There's different ways that you can make things more efficient using technology, and there'll be more startups, I think, coming to assist lawyers and clients directly as well.
So you mentioned one example there with the remote commissioning. What are some other ways we could see more of this fusion between law and technology, where we're looking at efficiencies? Certainly, we're looking at ways that eliminating those redundancies and speeding up the process. And of course, when you speed up the process, then the cost savings should be passed along to the clients, and then hopefully the whole circle continues. But what are some other things that you're keeping with the trends? I mean, you started your practice perhaps intentionally there at that point, saying it's time to capitalize here. And what do you think are some ways? I mean, we have the remote commission you mentioned. I mean, things like Clio, right, as a Canadian business that's doing extremely well in terms of a legal tech startup. What more can we be seeing as lawyers and by paralegal students here as well, in terms of ways to kind of take advantage of this change?
Yeah. I think it's the legal industry, whether it's lawyers or paralegals, but also the client's needs and approaches changing as well, right? So it's either a lot more self-help, do-it-yourself, or the customers or clients taking a more active role, right? Rather than letting the lawyer or paralegal do everything, the client's also being actively involved right from the get-go. For example, you talked about Clio. So Clio is a CRM, customer relationship management. So that's looking at, any potential clients and how do you get it. So like on my website, the contact form and client intake form and calendar, everything would be Clio. And then that gets fed into my database and I can convert that once the person becomes a client. So managing all that relationship using technology makes it easier for the lawyers to stay connected to make sure that they don't drop the ball. Now, on the client side, rather than the client coming in person and then speaking and providing their details, and then the lawyer or the clerks taking that information, they are being part of that process by inputting that data ahead of time. And the same way, more can be done where the clients are stating what problems they have, what legal needs they have, and describing that and passing to the lawyer along with the information, so that the lawyers or the paralegals can do the assessment of what are the specific needs to see if they can assist or they need to pass it on to someone else, right? So all this saves time from the law practice, so the cost savings can be passed down to the clients, right? Then in the practice management itself, rather than doing things just the paper way, there's a lot of tools that can be implemented to make sure that you can do things more efficiently, right? Whether it's signing or record keeping, maintaining the documents, sharing documents with other people in your law practice, and sharing documents. Another thing is securely creating a portal for the client. So when there's a document to review that we drafted for the client, rather than coming in person to read it, we can securely share our document over a portal so that they can log in and review review what we have drafted or changes we have made, and they could actively make comments. So already for my clients, I'm doing that where, I would draft a technology licensing agreement, and I would pass it, share the document with the client where they get to go in and add comments directly into the document. Usually all that is left for the lawyer. You read it, or at the end we give it to them and say, read, and are you okay? And we'll explain and get them to sign. But now, even at the drafting stage, we get the client involved for them to review and add comments. And sometimes the clients, I noticed, I have one client, for example, he's like, no, they're not comfortable. They feel that the legalese, that they shouldn't be touching the document. I'm like, no, just put it in plain English, because legal drafting is changing where plain English is acceptable. So just make your comments in plain English, and I may even adopt the same words that you're using, or I will make edits as needed. So it's engaging the client more in that process of drafting agreements, and it's good because it makes sure that the client is happy, the communication takes place, because oftentimes when there's issues, it's because of the communication gap between the clients and the lawyers. Similarly, in the medical profession, right? So when you have that continuous engagement where they are editing the documents, or they're reviewing, and they can log into a portal and get access to all the documents. For example, my client, for any incorporation, I can place all the documents in a share folder and just share it. So anytime when I'm adding more documents to that folder, they can view what's in that folder, right? So anytime they need to pass it to the accountant or to an investor, they just need to take the documents without having to call me every time, because if they're calling me, it's taking up my time. Because that's also part of the equation, right? The clients need to understand and value the time of the lawyers, right? The lawyers have a billable rate, or their time is money as well. So the more you can do yourself, or you can stay actively engaged in this process, and you're not calling and emailing all the time, and you get the clarity, then it's helping to keep your costs down, right? So instead of calling the lawyer to get the minute book every time, you have a shared folder where you could access and use it for whatever purpose. You're saving money from the communication charges with the law firm every time, right? So all this kind of changes are happening. Billing, rather than waiting, rather than doing hourly billing, there's flat fee billing, and the bills provide more detailed explanations of what are every line items, what are the expenses. The breakdown is provided, right? That they could comment on, and they don't need to wait for the last minute. These invoices can be generated ahead of time as well, right? So there's less and less of a need for retainer in all the cases, right? Because you can bill as you're going and do smaller chunks of work as well, right? So all this kind of model is going to be helpful for law firms to incorporate and for clients as well.
That's great in terms of some explanation there. With all of that, whether it's taking like a Spider-Man quote there, with great power comes great responsibility. But what are some of the things that people have to be aware of in terms of challenges, as well as concerns like privacy, for example? What happens now if that shared folder or portal gets someone gains access to it, right? Or there's like some ransomware attack on your law firm, right? So what are the things that, when we're shifting there, a lot of people kind of are jumping in and may not be aware of some of those concerns, and maybe I'm certainly missing a few others, but perhaps you can share what are some of the concerns and challenges that when we're embracing legal technology, we also have to be mindful as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think the legal profession, the law society, for example, will be putting a lot of emphasis on this to regulate the law practice more, right? In this sense, like for example, in the past, when it comes to wills, if the lawyer is storing the wills, there needs to be certain requirements like a fireproof, vault and so on to store, because otherwise, if anything happens and there's a fire, the wills can get burned, and you lose the customer's information, right? So that similarly now in this modern era, if we are sharing documents, and if there's any hacking, what are the impacts of that? What services are we using? Where is that information being stored? What country is that in? All that, the privacy and all the regulations need to be followed, right? So there'll be more and more things that even if the customers are not thinking about it, the regulators will be thinking about how to make sure that the lawyers are following the right protocols, right? So I think it's still in the early stages, but will be as lawyers law firms start to use more and more technology, there'll be more regulations around what are some safe practices. And I think that's important around privacy, security, to make sure that we, just like banks becomes target, we don't want law firms to become targets. It already has happened in some cases, but we want to make sure that even the smaller firms are having the right practices in place to make sure that they're secured and the clients can rest assured that their data will not be breached. Now on the client side as well, there needs to be more education on what they should do, what are the right practices, right? Like when it's paper, it's easy for them to hold it and without sharing with others. Now, when things are being shared over email, the client could also start to be forwarding the information around to other people. And, that has certain consequences as well, because so let's say the client privilege, gets changed as well when the client is now forwarding to other third parties and so on, right? So it makes it like having things in email and having documents in electronic format makes it easier for clients to start to distribute that too, and there could be potential consequences for that. So I think there needs to be more education about what are some best practices on the client side to safeguard their privacy, to safeguard the confidentiality, and what are the dangers of that. So I think a lot of education is needed on that end as well. And then, in terms of communication, when I think at law firms that used to do like real estate transactions using faxes and so on, less communication takes place between the client and those firms in some cases, right? I don't want to generalize, but in some cases, because there's a process in place of what documents get faxed at what incidents. But now with emails and WhatsApp and text messages, client has the options to contact the law firms in more ways, right? But the law firms at the same time have to make sure that all their communications and records are being kept properly for record keeping purposes. But the clients also have to realize that if they're communicating in all these angles, it could become an issue, and they could be taking up the time, and they may get billed more because they're taking up more resources. Rather than technology saving time and making it easier, it could also make people spend more time communicating, texting, and emailing, which ends up taking more time, right? Because you don't have that division when you do the work versus communicating, right?
Right. Certainly, it creates another. You got to review it. You got to compile it. You got to put it in, all the different mediums into one record, right? That shows that there's all this dialogue between you and the client.
Exactly. Because as lawyers, I think oftentimes the clients don't realize that we have record keeping requirements, that any communication, we need to keep records of that. So when they're texting or sending messages in our private phones and WhatsApp and so on, it becomes tricky. So in my case, I already started the practice whenever they contact in, text or WhatsApp, I tell them you have to email or you have to call. We'll set up a time to call so that I have the undivided attention for you, and I can take notes and I can keep records of the communication as well, right? So I think it's a learning and setting expectations right on the lawyer side, but also the client side.
Now, there is some concern, obviously, with the computers and technology that it makes some lawyers and paralegals and others in the profession kind of more obsolete, because we have, whether it's like a sci-fi movie with the computers are taking over the world type of thing, but you're seeing a lot more AI and automation and different things like that. What is that other impact? I mean, we talked certainly about the privacy stuff there and want you to protect about it, but I mean, are there any other kinks? I mean, are we not that far away from a computer just writing all the terms of the contract for the client and you just taking a check and sending it out, or are we not quite there yet?
No, I think we need to evolve. So as lawyers or paralegals, you need to be specialized in what you do, and there's always value that you add, right? And there's certain things that can be automated, whether it's a template of a contract, but in terms of understanding the complexity of what you're trying to do and what's the best strategy and what's the right way to approach, those things are hard for a computer to replicate in the short term, right? So so that's why it's very important for lawyers to also evolve, where you're gaining your skills, you're sharpening your skills to become specialized in what value you can add versus the computer, for example, right? If you're just taking, like for example, if the technology allows you to have templates but in terms of making the right customization or the strategy for the client and the understanding what language would be the best fit for our client in a specific need, those would be specialized skills that a lawyer would have, right? So it's important that you continue learning, continue growing, continue evolving to make sure that you have specialized skills that the clients are coming for, right? And it's hard, like whether it's in medicine or in law or even in technology. If you sit there and fear that computers are going to take over what we do, then that insecurity itself is a problem. I feel like you just need to keep learning, keep growing, and in my case, I continue to challenge myself. Okay, how can I keep learning? How can I keep growing so that I am adding more value? Because I don't want to stay stagnant, right? I need to keep growing so that I'm feeling that I'm growing, I'm learning something new, I'm providing more insights for my clients. And I think that applies to anything in life, any career, any path, right? We always need to keep growing so that that there's value that we can add.
That's certainly a great advice there. And I think as a follow-up to that, I mean, I get this question then from students who are like, well, look, I see that this technology is coming, COVID's happening, it's accelerated everything. What do I need to do now? I mean, I'm in school, it's still an opportunity to learn some more things where I can get and put myself in a better position for a lot of firms that are embracing some more technologies. What are the things that students can do? I mean, beyond obviously the classroom, in terms of getting a better grasp of being sort of the better digital, for their digital future and legal technology. What are some strategies they can implement to be more adaptive to the times?
Again, a good question. So, I think learning when you're in school for students, you're learning the theories, but it's important that you get the experience, right? So, and the experience doesn't just come from working at a firm or at a company. You can do things on your own as well. So I think just reading up on what are the different trends and also practicing, like trying to find ways to do projects or to get involved, to volunteer, to get different opportunities to put things that you're learning to use, right? So reading up and also putting things to use by practicing, by volunteering, or at finding workplaces to help out with, right? So that's at a broad level, but also sitting back, like the conversation we're having now, to think about, okay, if a student wants to become a lawyer or paralegal, really digging deep to think about why they have that passion and working. Because if you're truly passionate about something, you're going to be fully committed to that and you're going to work hard towards making that dream come true, right? And when you're passionate about an area, you're going to spend more time to do the research, right? So if you're passionate about this field, you'll think about how is it changing, how is it evolving, how is technology going to impact, what are the tools that's already available to help lawyers and to help the public, what else can be created, how do we foresee things to change in the next few years, what are my strengths? So if it's, for example, reading, my legal drafting is my strength, and maybe on the technology side I'm not as strong, then what can I do? What courses or what projects can I do? Or where can I volunteer that's not necessarily related to law, but something else related to technology where I can pick up those skills? And I think even law schools are adopting those programs where they're now teaching about financial literacy. They're teaching technology skills to lawyers, right? Because it's all goes hand in hand. The notion of everybody graduating and going and working at a big Bay Street firm is also changing, right? A lot of people are starting their own practice, like myself, right out of the gate. So providing that business entrepreneurial training is also important for lawyers. How do you run a practice, right? Like when I started my practice, I had to figure out a lot of things, right? And I hope to be sharing more and more about that aspect of what did I need to do to get started. And I think that's an important conversation to have as well, that we can learn from each other and offer to law students or paralegal students on how do you get a practice going? What are the challenges? And, so kind of, I wish I spent more time figuring those out beforehand. But, so I think things like that, like, it's not always about working at a big firm. Maybe you may want to start on your own. If that's the case, maybe working at smaller firms to understand how things work, or getting mentorship or thinking through, things like Clio, what are the practice management software, how does bookkeeping work, what are the law society requirements for record keeping, all of that, trying to read up and figuring it out is helpful, right? So do your homework, work hard, and figure these things out. And it's not just the narrow field that you're in, but all these other skill sets are important in the modern lawyering, I would say.
That's great, because now I think I have a really great follow-up, because they're getting into practice management, our course, in a couple more weeks. And pretty much exactly what you said. There are things that they're going to start thinking about, creating a business plan and looking forward. So exactly what you said there, I think it is a great, maybe you can share a little bit more insight from your own journey, right? Because again, it's very unique, given the different backgrounds that you have. I mean, I don't know how many, if we went through the Law Society list there of engineers slash MBA slash JDs there. But then starting your own practice and taking all that specialized knowledge you've had from those different hats you've worn in your different careers, and now you're like, I'm ready to go ahead in a pandemic nonetheless, right? I mean, let's not forget about that, right? That now you got to factor that in, because now, I mean, do you need to be in a downtown Toronto, Lake Ontario looking window, on a high rise anymore for your practice, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of that is changing, or maybe we still have to kind of keep those options open, because there is the Zoom fatigue. Maybe there are still going to be some clients who want to be able to come and meet you in person, right? So what can you share from the journey that you've had there, in terms of what we were just talking about, in terms of getting prepared and having that one eye looking forward to a year, 2 years from now, from students or young lawyers or paralegals listening about starting your own practice and what you should be worried about?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And yeah, I think, we don't know what the future holds exactly, but it's good to be open and flexible, right? In my case, I'm always open and flexible about the different scenarios and what may come tomorrow. So, as you said, we may continue this remote engagement level, or I probably think that it's going to be some mix where, there'll be a lot of continuing of working from home and some in-person interaction in the future. So that hybrid model, right? And there will be more and more lawyers who will start their own practices or have smaller groups, smaller partnerships, right? So for that, it's good while they're in school to start speaking with different lawyers or start looking at what is needed to start on your own. And I think some of the law school programs and also maybe probably paralegal programs as well, and even the Law Society trainings that they're providing for articling, LPP, is providing those kind of skills from what I learned from other colleagues who've done those programs. So it's good that they're providing the practice management training that's needed, because that's equally important. So in that, students should pay attention to learning about how do you start a practice, what are the different ways to get registered, whether an incorporation is needed, a professional corporation is needed or not. What are the pros and cons? Which one is right for them? Are they going to rent an office? Are they going to rent a shared office, or are they going to fully work from home? How are you going to keep your records? Is it, printing files? Where are you going to keep the files? Where are you going to store the communications in terms of email? So which platform are you going to use for emails? Which platform are you going to use for storing your files electronically? Because there's different options. And if you're going to do the client intake or the lead generations through CRM, which platform is right for you? And then looking at all the Law Society requirements of record keeping and bookkeeping, and figuring out what's the best tool that's appropriate for you to maintain your accounting, right? Bookkeeping. And are you going to turn to a professional bookkeeper to help you with that, or are you going to do it on your own? If you're going to do it on your own, now you need to put on the bookkeeper hat and learn all that as well, right? So that's that administrative part of it could be very time consuming, but the more time you put into figuring things out at the early stage, the better it is, so that you're not trying out too many different options. And it may not be always a bad thing. In my case, I think I spent, my bookkeeper would tell you that, looking at my expenses, like, wow, you had every single tool available out there, but I wanted to play with them to experience, since I didn't have that opportunity before, I wanted to play and engage with different tools to assess which one is the right fit for me. But it also gave me an opportunity to see where the gaps are, or what can be improved from a legal tech point of view, right? So I had different kinds of accounting software, different kind of practice management software that I was exposed to. And now, a few months later, I know which one's the right fit for me and what's an overkill, right? So the more time you spend reading up and playing with different tools and making those decisions of office or shared office or virtual office or working from home fully, and which packages and what kind of support staff you need right from the get-go, and all these decisions to think through would be good. Where are you going to get your clients? Who would be the referral sources? How will you do? Another thing that you see me doing a lot is the marketing, the social media engagement, right? So making those decisions on how will you get your clients? So where will you share your knowledge? Where will you do your marketing? Because some of that will cost money. So making those decisions, having a business plan, as you said, is important if you can afford to have that early on, right? To be honest, I didn't have the luxury of sitting down and planning all this. I just dive right in. But if you can take a step back and plan it and have a business plan of how you're going to get started, that would be fantastic, right? Because then you're not starting and then figuring things out. You could plan a little bit and then start, right? And it will save you time, money, and stress, which I had to endure a lot of over the past few months.
Now, Suresh, it's good you just touched on there at the end, social media marketing and digital marketing and marketing in general. That's also another thing that we forget as legal practitioners. If you're running your practice, you have all these other hats to wear, as you mentioned, the administrative ones. But I mean, I think that's how I came in contact with you there. I think it was, I believe you also had spoken on one of our former guests, Connie Swarin, had a little talk as well about business immigration. But maybe you could share a bit about mentorship and networking and marketing, and because they're all kind of fused together in terms of letting the world or letting your potential clients know, hey, this is Suresh, he's open for business, and here's what he can offer for you. What did you put into your efforts there in terms of getting your name out there?
Yeah. So for me, it's not so much, to be honest, marketing to get more clients, because I'm grateful for the network that I have and people who know that I'm in practice. They call me or they email me. But why I do what I do in terms of social media is, to be honest, is because I like sharing the knowledge. So I like sharing information. I want to empower the public and people on what are the different information that's available that they can do. Just that awareness, right, about what their rights are, or what are the different legal information they need to know, right? So I like sharing knowledge. I like teaching. I used to teach and mentor as well. And I continue to mentor. So I feel like it's part of that mentorship that I'm trying to share that knowledge with other people, having gone through and having all this education and professional background. I just want to share that, right? But in the process of sharing that on social media, you do have people thinking about different needs that they may have and connecting you, right? And either you can assist or you can connect with other people. But I think that's also changing, because before you'll have lawyers primarily writing and so on about in different journals, different magazines and so on. Right now you have more lawyers turning to social media and just sharing what they're doing and how things are going, and they be able to engage with potential clients and other law students. I follow other lawyers who do similar things, and a lot of law students are following them. So it's part of their learning. It's law students are not just listening to the professor, they're also able to engage through social media with practicing lawyers and augment their learning, right? So I think it's great. So I just want to be part of that teaching and sharing knowledge. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it would be probably very difficult to have something like this, a little bit more challenging, certainly to get people in person pre-COVID, and convince finding it's harder to find that block of time that doing something like this works out really well. See, another question from one of my students before I forget, before we wrap up here, kind of going back to the privacy we were talking about before, and people recording stuff, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of apprehension with court proceedings where, in court, it'd be pretty hard, if I were to pull out my phone, in court there and start recording something. I mean, to do it conspicuously, but on Zoom, I mean, I'm recording this right now, but I mean, if you could have potentially no idea if it was a a direct recording or a phone being used or an audio grab or something. Is there anything we can do about stuff like that being, should we just automatically assume that once you're doing something on your computer there, that it's, I mean, certainly with things like algorithms and Google and Facebook and all that, that adds all that too. But should we just assume that, we have no way of absolutely controlling that from happening, or is there technology that can guard against that?
So I think that's a entire session on its own to discuss this. Because these are the risks and dangers, but and that's why lawyers and regulators, policymakers are going to be working hard tirelessly to bring in policies and regulations in place on making sure that people know what they're doing in terms of having consent of the other parties before recording and publishing and sharing information, right? But there will be many instances where things will happen without consent. And so it's going to be policymakers and educating the public and making sure people comply with that, right? Because the notion of privacy is being lost in a lot of the social media platforms that we're using, where we're not always getting the consent from all the involved parties before publishing information, right? So it's just about bringing in the right policies in place and educating the public on what's the right way of doing things. To say it in a short way, but this can be a entire conversation for an hour on its own. And the other thing, but what it does do, this type of conversation, what it allows to kind of tie back to what I was saying earlier of sharing the knowledge rather than, because time is limited too, right? I'm already stretched thin in terms of my time commitment. So it's hard to engage one-on-one with people to answer all the questions or teach and so on. When you have this kind of forum and you put it on social media, you're able to educate or share the knowledge with a lot more people than one-on-one interactions, right? So it's good in that sense that we have these kind of options available now, but the privacy that's important to think about when it comes to all this technology and recording and sharing without consent that some people are doing. So we need to be mindful of that.
Right. And again, it comes with that, we get all of these advances and efficiencies and eliminating these redundancies, but you also have to look at what cost that may come with, and perhaps finding ways to deal with those as well, and so we can get the best of both worlds there. So Suresh, thank you so much for taking the time here and joining us today. It was great learning and discussing. And like you said, we could go on, and there's so much other areas here with technology and the law and how they intersect and are fused together. And I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities for students who have that kind of background or are developing that background to really go and be innovative and look at different ways that we can improve our legal. I mean, it doesn't necessarily even have to be legal, right? I mean, a lot of the clients are going to come with these ideas, and they're looking for ways to sort of bring it all together and follow the law. And the law is going to be constantly changing, as whether it's something with COVID or regulation, and recognizing sometimes we're a little late catching up to what the technology is doing. So where we got to figure out well, how do we ensure Canadian content on Netflix, right? I mean, there's all of these things that are happening. So I thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us all about it. Just wondering if you have any final words of wisdom there for students. I mean, you had a lot of time there as a student. Actually we share probably a couple of schools there, I think Osgoode and University of Waterloo. So I'm sure you could remember back to those days and different programs you had and looking at where you are today, and any advice you have for my students listening. And thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think in closing, I would just say that, follow your passion and, continue learning and do what you enjoy. I don't think it's, I didn't do my degrees for the sake of doing the degrees. As life happens, you become interested in different things and you learn. But it is also important to realize that just going to school or getting the degrees is not good enough. You need to be able to apply. So like putting things to practice and seeing how everything can be applied is also very important as well. So, and every person would have a different interest. So just follow your dream and work hard and stay focused.
All right, thanks again, Suresh. I wish you all the best, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Hopefully we see you again tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
JP. Bye.